All right, welcome back to the Living Life Well show. So today's title, The Science of Sweat, Decoding HIIT. Well, when I like to think about working out, I've really come on the side of landing on HIIT. When I look at it time and time again, HIIT or high intensity interval training really is the answer to most of your workout questions, quite honestly. So, today we're going to tackle a question that almost every home fitness enthusiast, or even anybody that's not necessarily an enthusiast and maybe is going to the gym, has asked. Is what I'm doing actually working? Do I need to go harder or change to something else? And really, how do I know? So, today we're breaking down a practical evidence supported framework for home based HIIT style resistance training. We're going to look at combining the objective data from your smartwatch with the subjective wisdom of your own body. We'll dive into one of the most accepted methods for self evaluation, and then we'll look at even the accuracy pitfalls of the Apple Watch and what it's telling you, and why the 2025 American College of Sports Medicine and Exercise and Sports Science Australia, ACSM and ESSA for short, joint statement says that your feelings might be just as important as the data. So let's jump right in. So let's start with the tech. Most people, or many of us, have a smartwatch. We track sleep, steps, heart rate, and even going further, you can look at the aerobic component. But just looking at quote beats per minute doesn't really tell the whole story, but because your heart rate is unique to you. That is the key to HIIT or any training. You are unique, and your current level of fitness is unique to you at this unique time, meaning what you did 2 weeks ago, 2 months, 2 years, or 2 decades ago doesn't matter for today. This is the key to any training, but even more specifically to what we're discussing today, which is HIIT or high intensity interval training. So, to determine where we are for starting a HIIT style workout regimen, we need some testing. For those familiar with the Peloton, you have the FTP ride to determine your power zones. This is a good test, but really only applies to the Peloton, and unless you have a connected heart rate monitor, doesn't necessarily carry over to non-Peloton workouts. So what can we do? Well, the gold standard for field testing at home when you don't have access to a full cardiopulmonary lab is the heart rate reserve method, also known as the Karvonen method. And there is some math involved, and it may sound like high school algebra, but it is essential for targeting the right zones. The formula looks like this. So your target heart rate equals your resting heart rate plus, in parentheses, the desired intensity percentage multiplied by the difference of the max heart rate minus your resting heart rate. Okay, I know that was a lot. And now we've got to figure out, okay, what is our max heart rate too? So the best way to do this is to take 220 minus your age, and that will give you roughly what your heart rate should be. But word of caution, according to the research, there is some deviation with this, about 10 to 12 points above or below. So you might be redlining sooner or later than what this high heart rate suggests. So if you're doing a HIIT session, here are kind of your target anchors, okay? Warm up as well as rest interval needs to be about 40 to 50% of that heart rate reserve, that HRR. The high intensity intervals, this is where the magic happens. You're looking for 80 to 90% of that heart rate reserve. So during those recovery, you should be dropping down to that 40 to 50% unless your system flush out before the next round. And these percentages bring me back to what I said before. This is about where you are today because what you did previously may be impossible for you to get to or you may be only in the warm up phase with level of perceived exertion. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Um, so, recovery time will also vary based on current level of fitness as well as the length of time for the high intensity interval. So, let's talk about the hardware. Specifically, is that Apple Watch or maybe the Garmin telling the truth? Well, as with most things, it's a little bit of a good news, bad news scenario. So, in studies comparing the Apple Watch to the gold standard, the Polar H10 chest strap, the watch showed high validity during certain resistance exercises like squats, deadlifts, or seated rows. Basically, if your arm is relatively steady, the sensors do a really good job. However, and this is a big however, for HIIT fans, especially with body weight exercises, the accuracy drops significantly when there's a lot of wrist motion. So think of burpees, bicep curls, overhead presses. As your intensity increases and your heart rate transitions rapidly, the watch doesn't quite keep up with what is actually happening. So if you're really serious about a heart rate guided training, you need a chest strap. So look for things like that Polar H10, and they will give you a lot more information to go by if you're really wanting to use your heart rate. The good news is you don't have to. The second layer of our framework is this subjective self-assessment. This is where the rating perceived exertion, or RPE, comes in. And back to that 2025 consensus statement, the joint expert statement between the ACSM and the ESSA, they really fall on the side of this perceived exertion is really the best method when lab testing isn't available. So if you can't go in and get your VO2 max, which most of us aren't going to do, this is really the way to look at it. So how do we, scale this? What do we look at? So basically this perceived exertion scale has a 0 to 10 and up to a 20 scale. And this is the most intuitive, basically meaning a 2 to 3, that's easy. While a 4 to 5 is moderate, 6 to 7, you're going to look at high intensity. Over 7, like an 8, 9, 10, you're at max. Okay. The 6 to 20 scale, this is designed to correlate more with heart rate. So, on this scale, an exertion of 13 might feel like a heart rate of 130. Okay. So for your HIIT workouts, when you're in that 80 to 90% heart rate zone, you should feel like you are at a heavy to very heavy exertion level. So the beauty of layering the RPE with your smartwatch data is that it accounts for things the watch can't see, like if you didn't sleep well, if you're dehydrated, or if you're under high mental stress. If your watch says you're at 140 beats per minute, which would be kind of in that moderate category, but you feel like you're at a 9 out of 10, your body's telling you to trust this feeling over the screen. You probably, if that's the case, need to not do HIIT that day. Probably need to look at doing something else, or even just take a rest day. So out of all the possibilities for assessment, this is the key in my opinion, because you are unique. You're going to have days where you can really bring it and days where you shouldn't, and don't need your watch or any strap to tell you that. You have to be a student of you. That is the most important thing when you're looking at this. Be curious about yourself. So that also brings us to another question. So how long does an interval need to be, and how much rest do I need after that high intensity interval? So there's 3 primary HIIT models. Researchers generally categorize HIIT into 3 kind of different time frames. The best version often depends on your current fitness level and goals, quite honestly. But best for shorter interval, 15 to 60 seconds, and then about 15 to 120 seconds rest. So work being 15 to 60 seconds, rest being 15 to 120 seconds. This is going to be for those people that are beginners, maybe older adults, those really looking for the anaerobic power. Okay. The medium interval is going to be calculated at 1 to 2 minutes of work with 1 to 4 minutes of rest. And this is going to be more for cardiac rehab, metabolic health, and diabetes patients as well. And then the long interval, this is where we're talking about 4 minutes of work and only 3 minutes of rest. This is for elite aerobic conditioning and really going more for athletic performance. And so those are kind of the categories: short, medium, and then long. And so looking at where you are and what your specific goals are can help determine what level of hit you need to even consider starting at. That gives you a rough guide for what your work interval should be, as well as your rest interval. Now, granted, these aren't hard and fast rules. We'll talk a little bit more about this at the end. So, for some clinical population, HIIT is often more effective than kind of the traditional moderate intensity training because these rest periods really allow you to hit higher intensities than you can sustain continuously. So think of the ever popular zone 2 to 3 workouts that are purported to be best for your cardiovascular fitness. This is kind of what we're comparing to when we're talking about moderate. So, cardiovascular disease and heart failure, the gold standard is going to be 4 minutes of that high intensity. That's at 80 to 90% of your VO2 max, followed by 3 minutes of active recovery. So, that doesn't mean that you're just falling down on the floor, right? You're still moving to some degree. Remember, recovery is getting that heart rate down to about that 40 to 50% level there. So when we look at a systematic review, it found that a medium HIIT interval of 1 to 2 minutes of work performed 3 times a week over 12 weeks yielded the largest improvements in cardiorespiratory fitness for cardiac rehab patients. So patients that had come out of bypass or stenting. So even though it suggests that longer intervals up to 4 minutes, this is talking about patients that in theory may have been pretty deconditioned prior to starting this workout, and they only did 1 to 2 minute intervals. So starting is the biggest thing when you're talking about cardiovascular fitness. When we're talking about obesity, focusing on ventilation and metabolic rate, HIIT is superior to continuous training for sure in zones like 2 to 3 for obese patients. The reason is it reduces the respiratory restriction and fatigue that you get when you're doing these long steady state sessions. So for obesity, you really want to look at going more for weight loss, going more towards the side of HIIT and less towards the side of doing like long cardio session. Now that brings us to the beginners, the deconditioned, the older adults. It really shows that the optimal protocol is very short bursts or better. Really looking at the analysis, intervals of less than 60 seconds are going to be important with rest periods of 90 seconds, typically going to give the biggest boost to your VO2 max, which again is that gold standard. So short bursts of 1 to 2 minutes of intense activity 3 times a day have been shown to reduce cardiovascular mortality risk by up to 47%, which is just really amazing when you look at it. So kind of getting down, what is the best ratio is often dictated by the modality of the exercise and how quickly the heart rate recovers in that specific activity. So running sprints. So for those people that are my cardio people, this includes people that are wanting to run long distances, that are wanting to run the 10K, the half marathon, the marathon, the ultra. The best ratio is going to be a 1 to 9 ratio actually when you're talking about it. So what does that look like? That means about 30 seconds of sprinting to about 4.5 minutes of a slow jog. And you may be working up to that. You may be splitting that in half. So you're doing 15 seconds of a sprint and a little over 2 minutes of a slow jog because you may need to work up to this to be able to sprint for 30 seconds, right? And so again, sprinting is going to be very taxing on the central nervous system. A massive rest to work ratio allows for that maximal effort in every sweat set. So then swimming, the best ratio we're looking at there, 1 to 1. 50-meter sprint, 50-meter slow, nice swim. The buoyancy and the horizontal position of swimming allow for faster heart rate recovery compared to running. And so that leads to that difference in kind of the work to rest ratio. So now this is my favorite, right? The resistance or the body weight training. Typically 2 to 1 is what we're talking about. So 30 seconds of work to 15 seconds of rest. So think about it like HIIT style or circuit style HIIT. It's a high metabolic demand while giving just enough time to switch stations or exercise. So really, when you're talking about starting on this, and as you progress, the guidelines it really kind of suggest narrowing that gap between work and rest. So if you're a beginner, you want to start with a 1 to 3 ratio, meaning whatever your interval is for work, your rest needs to be about 3 times that. So, for example, a 30-second interval, 90 seconds of rest. Okay. As you improve, that gap comes closer and closer. So once you get to intermediate, you're talking 1 to 1. Your work and your rest are the same. As you advance, you may go to a 2 to 1 or even 3 to 1 ratio. So maybe 90 seconds of work and 30 seconds of rest. So again, it just really depends on, where you are. So to wrap things up, the most effective way to monitor your home HIIT sessions is a dual track system. Use the Karvonen method to set your objectives based upon your resting and your max heart rate. Beware of your watch's limits. It's great for squats, not so much for burpees. Cross-reference with your exertion, your perceived exertion. Use a 0 to 10 scale to check in with yourself during every rest interval. See where you're at. And then determine your goals. Are you looking to build cardiovascular fitness, lose weight, build muscle? This will help determine what exercise is going to be best for you. Be gentle with yourself. As I've said, each day is different, and what you did yesterday doesn't determine what you need to do today. And one size does not fit all. When in a class following an instructor or an app or video, go at your pace, not theirs. That may be more or less intense than what they are suggesting. And then routine is key, but HIIT is only one tool in that routine. Make sure you take days off. Have low intensity days. Do those zone 2 or 3 because variety is important in workouts just as it is in life. So by using all these tools, you will create a framework that ensures you're working hard enough to see the results that you want, but not so hard that you're risking injury or burnout. So thanks for listening. Check the show notes for references or the math formulas, if you will. And I hope this has been beneficial. That's it for this episode of the Living Life Well show. If you like what you've heard and want to learn more, or want to know how to put this into practice for yourself, go to livelifewellclinic.com. Until next time, this is Dr. John Skelton saying go out and live the truth so you can live life well. The preceding is for entertainment and educational purposes only. It is not meant to be used to prevent, diagnose, treat, or cure any condition. The information contained in this show does not substitute the need for a qualified medical professional, nor is it meant to provide medical advice or services. If you feel information presented in this show may apply to you, we recommend you seek out the help of a qualified medical professional who can evaluate and treat your specific concerns.